Welcome to part 2 of the Gerard Schaefer episode. This episode will get more gruesome, but the third episode is what will be the most graphic. I will do a quick refresher from the previous episode, then get started. Where we left off, Gerard Schaefer was sentenced to 1 year in jail at his December 1972 court hearing for the abduction and assault of Pamela Wells and Nancy Trotter from July 21st, 1972. Even though it was a violent attack, he was allowed out on bond since July of 1972 and did not start serving his sentence until January 15, 1973. Of note, in his past, there were several disappearances and murdered women that Schaefer was linked to. Between July 1972 and January 15, 1973, the following women went missing. On September 27th, 17-year-old Susan Place and 16-year-old Georgia Jessup had vanished from Fort Lauderdale. Susan Place's mother wrote down the license plate and car description of the man they left to play guitar at the beach with. On October 23rd, Elsie Lena Farmer and Mary Alice Briscolina, both age 14, disappeared from Pompano Beach, Florida. Elsie's skeletal remains were found on January 17, 1973, at a construction site near Plantation High School. On February 15th, about 200 yards away, Mary's remains were also found. The girls' teeth had been pulled and scattered around their grave sites, but both girls were still able to be identified by dental records. January 8, 1973, Colette Goodenough and Barbara Ann Wilcox, both age 19, went missing while hitchhiking from Mississippi to Florida and were never seen again. Susan Place's mother did some investigating herself and found a letter from Susan to a Jerry Shepard, and she followed the lead to the address where she met Teresa, Gerard Schaefer's wife. She gave this evidence to the police. On April 1st, 1973, skeletal remains were found in a shallow grave near Blind Creek Beach on Hutchinson Island by 3 men collecting aluminum cans. 4 days later, Susan Place and Georgia Jessup were identified from dental records. Susan Place had been shot in the jaw, and the crime scene indicated that the 2 girls were tied to a tree, decapitated, and butchered. The finding of Susan Place's and Georgia Jessup's remains, along with the findings that Susan Place's mother gave to the police, provided them with enough evidence on Gerard Schaefer to obtain search warrants and search the home he shared with his wife Teresa, as well as his mother's home. On April 7th, police searched the home of Schaefer's mother and his wife, Teresa Schaefer, where Schaefer had personal items stored in a bedroom. Evidence recovered in the search included a stash of women's jewelry, 100-plus pages of writing and sketches depicting mutilation murders of young women, newspaper clippings, and other items. A driver's license, passport, diary, and a book of poetry belonging to vanished hitchhikers Colette Goodenough and Barbara Wilcox were found in the steam trunk where Schaefer kept his trophies. Other items found was an address book belonging to Belinda Hutchins and a purse belonging to Susan Place. With the amount of items found in the search of Schaefer's spare bedroom, the list of suspected victims had grown. But Schaefer faced charges in only 2 murders. He was indicted on May 18, 1973 for the slayings of Susan Place and Georgia Jessup and held without bond pending trial. He was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder in October 1973 to serve concurrent terms of life imprisonment. Also found in the trunk were items linking him to the disappearances and murders of the women he was linked to in the past. Among the news clips found in the trunk, there was one which referred to the February 1969 disappearance of waitress Carmen Halleck. A shamrock pin which belonged to her was found in Schaefer's hoard of stuff, along with a gold-filled tooth identified by Halleck's dentist. But once again, no charges were filed. The second missing woman, Lee Bonadies, had been a neighbor of Schaefer's when she disappeared in September of 1969. He had complained of her taunting him by undressing with her curtains open. 3 pieces of her jewelry were found among his belongings, as well as newspaper clippings about her disappearance, but no charges were filed when her skeletal remains were finally recovered in 1978. More jewelry linked Schaefer to the disappearance of 14-year-old Mary Briscolina, who vanished with 13-year-old Elsie Farmer in October of 1972. Their skeletons were found in early 1973, but once again, no cause of death could be determined and no charges were filed. A former investigator who worked on the case said Schaefer never admitted to killing anyone to me, but the stuff he put in his writings, the details of what we found at the crime scene were in his stories. Schaefer's writings talked about finding a spot to bury the woman and having them stand on an orange crate while he bound them. He had strangled them, raped them, bury them, and then dig them up again to rape them again. Schaefer maintained the writings were fiction. So, that is a quick summary, and now we can continue. Gerard Schaefer's wife, Teresa Schaefer, made her one and only visit on November 17, 1973, to serve Gerard with divorce papers. Fun fact, she later married Elton Schwartz, the public defender who represented Schaefer. So Schaefer is off the streets and in jail, and he found other ways, besides killing, to amuse himself while he was serving his life sentences. In 1979, he married a Filipina bride named Ellen. The young woman appeared in July 1980 and moved in with Schaefer's father. A marriage license materialized without a ceremony, but it was accepted by authorities at Avon Park's minimum security prison. Several contact visits were permitted before Schaefer's wife got her green card in 1985, and once she received that, then of course, she dumped him. A few weeks later, in September 1985, Schaefer was accused of plotting to escape from Avon Park and murder a hit list of victims, including his ex-wife, Elton Schwartz, Robert Stone, and Judge Trowbridge. State police confirmed the plot, and Schaefer was packed off to maximum security at Stark, home of Florida's death row, and he needed to be in maximum security. Despite being closely watched, Schaefer still managed to run a mail fraud operation from his cell, and he collaborated with cohorts outside to post ads in sex magazines soliciting money from various kinky tricks. To that end, Schaefer adopted various pseudonyms, of course always female. He became Mistress Felice, a dominatrix, prostitute Jessica Zuriaga, stern matron Miller, a husband killer on death row, and so on. Some of his slaves paid cash for the privilege of washing Mistress Felice's soiled panties, and of course these were delivered by mail for a price. Schaefer also enjoyed writing to inmates of other prisons, posing as the great love of their lives, all while laughing behind their backs. When not scamming, Schaefer worked as a jailhouse lawyer, but with a twist. While writing briefs for fellow cons, he milked his clients for information on their cases and then sold them out to authorities. One such inmate awaiting trial for murder told Schaefer where his victim's body could be found, and Schaefer relayed the directions to police, landing his client on death row. This was very reckless and probably turned him on. In 1986, collaborating with police from North Miami, Schaefer adopted the guise of Dee Dee Kelly, a 14-year-old prostitute who offered nude photos to pedophiles. Responses to his ads were collected by U.S. postal inspectors, but none of Schaefer's correspondents were prosecuted. Instead, authorities discovered he was working with another inmate, Mervyn Cross, to run a child pornography network from prison. Cross paid Schaefer's father a monthly stipend for use of his telephone line to communicate with Filipino colleagues. Prosecutors convicted Cross, adding time to his sentence, but no charges were filed against Schaefer. Even as the pedophile sting collapsed, Schaefer had his first encounter with condemned killer Ted Bundy. According to Schaefer, Bundy was always 100% respectful to him. Schaefer said that he treated Bundy as a supplicant, while others were hanging on his every word. Bundy allegedly confessed that he had been inspired by Schaefer's case to kill 2 victims on a single day in 1974. Schaefer and Bundy discussed some of the problems with murder, such as maggots and how to get urine out of the upholstery of a car. Their friendship ended when Ted Bundy was electrocuted on January 24th, 1989. Schaefer also had another confidant, and it was Otis Toole. Toole was sentenced to life for 6 murders and was suspected of many more, most notably the 1981 kidnap slaying of young Adam Walsh. By 1988, when he met Schaefer, Toole had several times confessed to Walsh's murder, always recanting his statements when detectives asked for proof. Schaefer wrote to Adam's father, John Walsh, host of America's Most Wanted, posing as Toole and demanding $50,000 for Adam's remains so you can get them buried all decent and Christian. Walsh ignored the offer, and Toole soon just got sick of Schaefer. Aside from the sadistic pleasure from tormenting Adam's parents, Schaefer gained nothing except the reputation as a snitch, which, of course, snitches get stitches. Around the same time of Bundy's execution, Schaefer lost most of his notoriety, probably in part due to Bundy and how famous he became, but he saw a chance to bring attention to himself once again. Sandra London, his girlfriend from a very long time ago when he was young, picked up a copy of Anne Rule's The Stranger Beside Me, which of course detailed her friendship with Bundy, and this made Sandra want to write a book on her relationship with Schaefer. So London wrote to Schaefer on February 8th, 1989, asking, "Remember me?" She pitched the idea of the book about his experiences and requested samples of his writing. One of Schaefer's biggest hobbies behind bars was writing these horrible stories, some of which were suspected of being real accounts of murders he had committed, and others were just gross fantasies. In one story, simply titled Whores, he recounts hanging a prostitute and having sex with her corpse. He writes about doing doubles, in which he states it's far more difficult than doing singles, but it puts me in a position to have twice as much fun. There can be some lively discussions about which of the victims will be killed first. A series of stories was about a rogue cop who moonlights as a serial killer targeting prostitutes. In his writings, Schaefer claimed to have started murdering women as early as 1965 when he was 19. A collection of his stories was published under the title Killer Fiction. More volumes followed, Schaefer insisting that his stories were art, but police and prosecutors described them as what they described the writings found in the trunk on the search of his home. They were thinly veiled descriptions of actual crime. One passage from the book reads, "In 1973, I sat down and drew up a list of my own. As I recall, my list was just over 80. The next day, given more time to reflect, Schaefer went on, I'm not claiming a huge number. I would say it runs between 80 and 110, but over 8 years and 3 continents. One whore drowned in her own vomit while watching me disembowel her girlfriend, so I'm not sure that counts as a valid kill. Did the pregnant ones count as 2 kills? It can get confusing." Schaefer was not very popular in prison. He had been attacked on at least one occasion, and his cell had been set on fire twice. You got to remember, Schaefer was not only a sex offender and a police officer, but he also was an informant or a snitch. And remember the disappearances of Peggy Ron, age 9, and Wendy Stevenson, age 8, that vanished from Pompano Beach, Florida on December 29th, 1969? Well, Schaefer denied being involved when he was publicly accused of the crime, but in a 1989 letter to Sandra London, he bragged of killing and cannibalizing the 2 children. London and Schaefer had briefly been engaged in 1991, but London broke it off and got engaged to another serial killer from Florida Danny Rolling, also known as the Gainesville Ripper, who was executed in 2006 by lethal injection. And Rolling is going to be a whole other story, and Sandra London is a whole other story herself. Schaefer did not take this rejection well and began sending her death threats. He tried to sue her 3 times for stealing his work, but he was unsuccessful. Schaefer claimed to have links to the Dixie Mafia and the Ku Klux Klan, who would do his bidding on the outside. However, none of that was true. Schaefer appealed his conviction 19 times in all, claiming that he had been framed by drug-dealing lawmen and Martin County prosecutors. All appeals were denied. Schaefer later began filing frivolous lawsuits, trying to sue one true crime writer for daring to describe him as being overweight, while separately trying to sue author Colin Wilson and Michael Newton and former FBI agent Robert Ressler for describing him as a serial killer. All of Schaefer's lawsuits were thrown out of court. Then, on December 3rd, 1995, another inmate, Vincent Rivera, who was serving life plus 20 years for 2 murders in Tampa, barged into Schaefer's cell, slashed Schaefer's throat, stabbed him in the eyes, and stabbed him over 40 times in the head and neck area. 40 times. Just count to 10. 1, 2, 3. See, I only made it to 3, and even you got sick of me counting it, so imagine 40 times. Like, that would even take longer than a second to stab. So, 40 times stabbed in the head and neck area. Rivera didn't really give a specific reason for killing him. He said one time Schaefer had taken an extra cup of hot water, leaving Rivera without any water, but he said that was not the reason why he killed Schaefer, but it was most likely the fact that he was not liked in prison and known as a snitch. In 2007, based on sworn testimony from Sandra London, 2 cold case murders tied to Ocala National Forest were closed and attributed to Schaefer. The victims were Nancy Leitner and Pamela Nader, who had disappeared 40 years before, in October 1966, after taking a walk through the nature trails. Their bodies have never been found. And also, just another side note, that after collaborating with Schaefer on his book Killer Fiction, she went to work with serial killer Danny Rolling in writing a book, and she also worked on a book in 2004 with Nicholas Clow, who was a necrophiliac cannibal and practicing Satanist who worked as a mortuary assistant. So like I said, Sandra London had a specific type, and she is just a whole other story herself. So I will end episode 2 here. Episode 3, which I will have out probably tomorrow or the day after, I will be reading a lot of Gerard Schaefer's very gruesome writings that pretty much described some of the murders that he did. So, until then, have a good evening.